Great. Hi there, welcome. Nice to see you all. Welcome to this panel all about data. My name is Juliane Kahl, and I recently founded the Responsive Fashion Institute in Munich. And that is a new platform to address issues of fashion, sustainability, and new technologies in Munich. And I research the future of fashion, so I'm looking for solutions to pressing answers. The Responsive Fashion Institute wants to develop products, test design approaches, encourage an engagement, support a dialogue and a discussion about innovation, sustainability within fashion. And that is why we're here, to discuss data. And I think most people ask me, so why do you do a panel about data at a sustainable fashion conference? And I think data is a very important issue, and it's much talked about. It's a very emotional issue, and it's a bit the elephant in the room. So I think it's really nice to really have a discussion about data. And really answer a question like, are we still in control of our data? What can we do with our data? Do we really understand what data is? How is data being used? How it's being collected in fashion? And what be a sustainable approach to data? And to address and hopefully answer some of these questions, I invited these three lovely people, and they will now briefly introduce themselves. And we had in the program, Daniel Grassinger is communicated. He had to pull out at a short-term notice, and we're really happy to have Andra Rojan here from Berlin today to step in for him. So if I could maybe give the word to you and that you quickly introduce yourself, Anna and Ralph and Cindy-Ricarda. Anna, do you want to start?
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for having me, and welcome everyone to our panel. My name is Anna, and I have a bit of a colorful background because I initially studied product design with a focus on metal works, and then did a master's degree in brand management and design thinking. I used to work as a product manager in the luxury and fashion industry, and then actually spent 10 years founding technology startups in Berlin. And I sold the last company at the beginning of last year. And since then, I've become more engaged in freelance consulting work and business coaching with a special focus on scaling companies in a sustainable manner, and also in helping especially German and European mid-market players to, let's say, cope with the digital transformation that's posing a bit of a challenge to everyone. So I work as an associate partner with a Munich-based consulting company called Enable to Grow, and I'm a certified scale-up coach, and that's basically my background. And I'm very happy to be here.
Great, thank you, Anna. Ralph?
Hi, my name's Ralph, and I'm from London. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of a blockchain startup. I spent the last 25 years of my life building software for predominantly investment banks and very advanced research organizations. Juliana wanted me here for data because I've worked with probably the largest data sets on the planet. And specifically for fashion, I spent the year before I started my blockchain startup working for ASOS, which is the leading English fashion brand, where I integrated the entire data infrastructure for fashion from left to right, buying across the planet. So thanks, Juliane, for having me.
Hello, my name is Cindy Roberts. I'm a PhD student at the Technical University of Munich, and I'm also a research assistant at the Munich School of Philosophy. And I'm conducting my PhD in digitization and democracy. So I'm part of the research group Ethics of Digitization. And I'm mainly dealing with fake news and typologies of fake news and the impact on democracy, and also with data-related questions like what nowadays could be a digital public sphere, or how, for example, autonomy could look like in digital times. And yes, also thanks for inviting me and having me, and that's my introduction.
Great. So we start with the first questions to Ralph, as you're the IT guy here in this round. Can you tell us about data? What is data really, and how it's been used, for example, at ASOS, which is a large e-commerce fashion company that really just won recently, you know, being one of the most innovative companies and everything. So how was your approach to data, and what did you build there?
Well, I mean, I'm conscious that most of you may or may not be technical, so I'll try to approach data two different ways. So what is data? Everything around you is data. So when we left the Industrial Revolution, everything was physical products. Now almost about 80 or 95% of every value transaction, including your cup of coffee, is information. You go to Starbucks and you think you're paying for the coffee, you're paying for the information. And that's the biggest difference people don't realize. So I'm going to tell you a little story about ASOS and data. So we were doing about 3,000 transactions or purchases a second at ASOS. Mainly millennials buying different things, be they jeans, be they, you know, whatever people buy, whatever millennials buy. And one day we noticed an incredible spike. In a period of about an hour and a half, we sold 138,000 choke collars, which I guess young girls like to wear choke collars, right? And we were like, how did that happen? How did we suddenly sell 138,000? So I led a small team that did machine learning, AI, to try to investigate what happened. And we found a deep chain of a single girl with a single Instagram post that caused 136,000 chokes to be sold. Traditionally, you would never have a chance of creating a model of such a thing. You'd never be able to model that qualitatively. You'd never be able to say, could I predict that this choke would sell that many? So what's happening is, for the first time, as we're seeing with the social media age, the interaction between our real-world behaviors and the ability for machines to follow behind us and learn about us. And the biggest difference there is that the consumer no longer owns their data. So we're in the third internet revolution. Most people don't realize that each technology revolution is about 10 to 12 years. We're 2 years into this big third wave. And the biggest challenge for every company and the biggest challenge for an individual is going to be, who owns your data? And that's why all the large companies, Facebook, Instagram, are all in a crisis mode, because we are now starting the point where consumers are waking up to saying, if most of the economic value of data is my data, why shouldn't I own my own data? Why should I not get the economic value of my data? So I'll give you a simple example. Every time you see an advert, 70% of that money goes into the advertising chain. 30% of it is kept by Facebook and Instagram, and none of you got any of it. But I had a quick check with some of my friends before I came here. Your average Munich demographic is $4,800 a year for you, and you got none of it. Not a single one of you was paid. So the blockchain is promising to take that data, take that identity, and somehow create a new way of looking at that. So my startup, which has been going for about a year, we're hoping to launch our alpha in about 6 months from now, is creating the world's largest distributed electronic marketplace, where we put the individual in charge of their data and reward them for their data. So that's a simple story for fashion.
Yes.
That answers that, right?
Yes, thank you for giving us that insight. Anna, you are the expert about businesses and business models, and from your experience from the startup scene as well, and advising companies on fashion issues, can you describe us how companies use data within their business models and how they monitor data?
I think most companies don't. I think by now everyone has realized that data is important. So a lot of companies, pretty much all companies, started collecting data, but they still don't know what to do with it to a certain extent.
Yes.
I think that one aspect of that question is the fact that a lot of people don't actually differentiate, and a lot of companies don't differentiate between different types of data. So we're talking, if we're talking about wearable technology. There we have sports data, performance data, etc. So that's interesting from a sports perspective.
Yes,
but if we just look at fashion, all we're looking at pretty much is behavioral data. And to a certain extent, in some cases, personal data like measurements. I think that's one of the key things where, for example, I know that Zalando is looking into fitting data a lot to take down their returns,
yes,
because they'll know more exactly and more precisely what's going to fit, and so they can reduce their returns and thus increase their revenue and their profit. Or not their revenue, but their profit. But the crucial thing is that a lot of people still don't really think about what right questions to ask.
Yes.
They've started gathering data, but they're not really using it yet.
Yes. And Cindy, from your point of view and from your research, what's your biggest concern related to the use of data nowadays?
Yeah, it was already mentioned from you, by your side. So it's responsibility. It's how we gather data, how we storage the data, and how we can make sure what happens with the data and how to control that. Also, regarding hacking and cybersecurity, and yes, it's also to ask yourself, do we have a right that our data might be deleted one day, and do we have a right maybe that Facebook pays us money if they use our data for their algorithm? So I think the biggest question, the biggest concern is responsibility, which is also going hand in hand with knowledge and awareness. And I don't know, on an individual scale, it's like that the people, I don't know, like to share things a lot. Some people are, how to say, quite critical about police. For example, the new police law in Bavaria, which allows the police to get some insights and communication. So I don't get that people on the one hand complain about that, but they post everything about the demonstration on Facebook, for example. And those things, and on a how to say, in economic terms, it's that I think we need to be much more brave. So I'm a little bit concerned about, how to say, that Germany is not brave enough to invest more in the KI sector, especially. And on a political level, I think also we have a problem. I don't know how many politicians are really, how to say, dealing with this kind of topics, which are quite crucial. So yes, they should deal more with that.
Can I?
Yes, please.
I think I'm completely with you, because I think we were having this discussion a little earlier. I think it's amazing how people, on the one hand, are happy to share things publicly. So basically they post things on platforms that are privately owned, where they actually give up their entire rights to the information they're posting, and they tick that little box when they sign up originally. And at the same time, then they say, okay, so I'm shouting this out publicly because I have no control about that data, but I don't want other people, like the government or the police or anyone, to be able to use that data. That's, I mean, we were talking about Speaker's Corner. I think that's a wonderful invention, but at the same time, I think it's amazing how much stupidity is going on in the world these days in dealing with data.
And absolutely, so we had a conversation earlier, so I have, probably contrary to a lot of people here, fairly far-right political views, and I go to Speaker's Corner in London to advocate those views. And the amount of resistance...
Have you ever gotten beaten up yet?
No, I'm very quick at running, so... and I have machine weapons, but no. So, and if you look at it, what you're seeing the dying signs of the last wave of a cycle. And we've seen this since the Industrial Revolution. We've seen this since the turn of the century. We've seen this now, the third wave coming around, where the real next wave is we should own our own information. So if you look at the Trump campaign, I worked on the Trump campaign and supported it, for example, getting President Trump elected. And you look at, for example, censorship, for example, against, let's say, just even run-of-the-mill conservative views, you'll see that everyone is trying to own, as Cindy alluded to, the information that is primarily sourced by yours. So we in the blockchain, you know that this is going to change when we put identity, trust, and transparency out of the hands of collectives and into the hands of individuals. Only you should know what size your underwear is, right? Only you should know who you vote for. only you should know how much taxes you pay. Neither the government or any other organization should know that. And that is going to be the biggest political transformation we have seen since arguably the Battle of Brentford or something. It's that big. That's going to take about 10 years to happen. And the political moves we see, Trump's last speech, is all pointing towards this revolution, which will impact everything. So I appreciate most people here because they care about sustainable fashion. But if you look at sustainable fashion, I can speak about a 45 deep supply chain at ASOS. And it's a very, very rich supply chain for sustainable sourcing. Unless someone could verify the veracity of the information all the way down to a sweatshop in Bangladesh, how can you trust? Trust, after all, mathematically is just a referral function, right? So I need to trust you and you need to trust someone else. The only way you could actually ever have pure trust is if you own every part of that piece.
Yes.
That's going to take 2 to 3 years to happen, and the world will be transformed bigger than social media when that occurs. So we in the blockchain sector believe we are steaming ahead with that transformation.
I think it might make sense. I'm not sure how deep the tech background of everyone is. Just to quickly point out why blockchain is the technology to actually drive that.
Okay, so that's quite easy. So initially, we're in 3 waves of mathematical progress. Everything used to sit on single computers, so everyone used to go to the same place. And in the last 10, 15 years, we decentralized that. So they went to different people like Facebook or Instagram. The final stage, and there's no stage after that, is to distribute it. So imagine if I had my ATM bank card number, and I just didn't have it, or my bank didn't have it, but all my friends had 1 digit each. For that to be broken, everyone must break every single one of my friends.
So it's basically impossible to manipulate.
It's impossible to manipulate it without knowing it's been manipulated. And that's now, that technology has almost been finished being constructed. So in the next couple of years, you're going to see products that you've never heard of before. And fashion, not just fashion, people who care about the environment or sustainability. When I buy my, I went to Acne today. If I picked up my shirt from Acne, I want to be able to click with my phone on that shirt and see the entire data and know that that data was not manipulated by Acne, and that Acne could not fiddle with that data, and that Acne was telling me something that was verifiable. That's maybe 2 years away. So.
And if I address this question to all 3 of you, can we say that we're still in control of our own data?
We will only be able to be in control once that technology has come to the consumer place. Right now, you are just literally a pawn in a global organ. So I spent 10 years working at investment banks, and everything, your money is just owned by banks, the global banking system. That will only change when you have cryptocurrencies where you can transact directly. Mm-hmm. So that may be 5 years away. So.
Yeah. Cindy, yeah?
Yeah, I think also on a larger scale we just need to find, still need to find the right regulations and rules so that companies, for example, at one day they need to be obliged to, keep some, comply with some guidelines, yes. And so it's about us to define this right now and also to implement those technologies so that we can get back control. Right now, I think, we can refrain, and it's not that if you share all the data, you can, you can do this like without caring at all, but you can also check out and invest a lot of time to consider where and how to spend your data. But I think on a, longer perspective, we need to, consider guidelines, laws, and global regulations, because data is also, even if we find some regulations in Germany, we have
it's borderless,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes, so
unless
we need
you have internet.
global regulations for sure.
I think it's going to Cindy's particular thesis and stuff, I'm sure it's going to pose a lot of challenges because you say regulation, but you're entering a world where it will be impossible for the government to regulate it. So there will be no technical mechanism for them to. So we're inventing new trust models in society that the government will not be able to get in between you and I. There won't be any technical mechanism we'd be able to know if they got in between us. And this is the wild west in ethics. It's a wild west in epistemology of ethics. It's kind of out there stuff. So
I think the tricky part is that it actually although it kind of goes via governments through technology, but it comes back to every single individual. And it's about the maturity of every single individual in dealing with their own information and in interacting with companies, in their consumer patterns that will actually shape whether that actually works or not.
But I'm going deeper than that. So I was in Los Angeles recently, and there's a blockchain application in Los Angeles that allows you to buy a joint of marijuana with a direct transaction, and it's unbreakable. So the government could not actually know the transaction occurred. The transaction closed between two people. It's impossible to regulate.
That's exactly what I mean.
So
if
the
I,
trust
as an
model
individual,
changes.
decide that
Right.
I want to do something that may or may not be legal, where I
But
want to
it may not
conduct
be,
that
it may not be that. That's the
interaction.
obvious early market. It may be something else like swapping your old sort of Marnie jacket, right? You might want to say, hey, I want to swap my Marnie jacket with you, but I don't want anyone to know I did it. I don't want to pay taxes. The government would not be able to monitor that transaction because they couldn't mathematically do it. That's what the blockchain is going to show up with. And that's a Wild Wild West, right?
So the interesting question is, how are actually governments going to deal with the fact that a lot of transactions, a lot of behavioral patterns, a lot of things that we do every day will not be, they will not be able to monitor it, they will not be able to shape it. There can be regulations and it can be legal or illegal, but if you can't actually follow up on someone conducting an illegal transaction, how are you going to punish them? How are you going to actually
I think it probably speaks more to Cindy's field, but I think the models of government are fundamentally going to be challenged. The models of representative democracy, the models of deferring my actions to a government body is going to be shaped again. It has to be. The current government models will not be there in 20 years. So.
Cindy, you've just been to Berlin, so what's your input on that?
Yeah, I've been to Berlin, but I just want to stick to this. I think in the end it's really a question like if all the technologies can be used from kind of Chinese governments, and the technology can be also used to foster democracy. So it depends on us where it will go. And I still believe in democracy, and I still think that the people, I don't know, it's about us then to make a law to forbid those things or to invent technologies who will be then able to, I don't know, get behind this or whatever. Let's see what the future will bring. So, yeah, for sure, regarding, I don't know, I can make an example. I don't know if this is kind of related, but it's interesting. I would like to have your opinion on that, because in Paderborn, that's a smart city, there are now digital garbage cars, and they, for example, can, detect all garbage crimes. And now in future, I think it's an interesting question if we now as a state, if we want all the people to have the garbage crimes detected, and how to deal with this, for example, and also how to, I don't know, if we don't want to, I don't know, have a state that is too paternalistic, so that is telling you all over the time what to do. We also need to think about maybe how to redefine laws. I mean, it's just a simple example, but maybe then just, I don't know.
Yeah, but it addresses sustainability as well. And I mean, if you look at the fashion model, you know, one day we might find out that, you know, it's undoable. And then to what criticism or to what criteria will we follow up? And what do we make of it? So I think if we talk about data, we have to talk algorithms as well. And question to all three of you, is there any step back to algorithms? Is there any, once they're there, because loads of algorithms are being installed now or created now, but what if we find out that they don't work or they don't make sense? Can we go back?
Well, it's worse than that, because we're now entering the scariest phase of unsupervised machine learning, or what the man in the street would call.
We're talking singularity?
Yeah, well, a man in the street would call AI. Well, AI means Big Brother is already working in practice. It's working everywhere.
Yes.
But at some point, it's going to become unsupervised and free. And there's a very famous quote from a science fiction writer, and because there's a lot of people who care about the environment here, it's a very scary quote. And it says, in the inevitable showdown between man, machine, and nature, man is on the side of nature. Nature, however, is on the side of the machines. So at some point, humanity is going to hit this beast we're creating, and that's probably going to be in our children's lifetime.
Okay.
So that's how close that is.
Well, I think that it actually, I looked into the whole question of AI and the singularity a few years back, and I think the interesting question is really, we are using technology, at the moment we're still using technology, but we're coming to a point, and we're coming closer and closer to it, where the risk is getting higher and higher that it's going to flip at some point.
It's worse than that. So I'm from London, so I'm obviously a anti-democratic, pro-Brexit, and I love English independent bands. Sorry.
Oh, you said the B word. Sense of humor.
What bands? And we now have an AI program that's trying to copy niche independent music. And it's almost, so I have a friend in a very famous band, and it's getting very close to copying a song that sounds like it was written by the Libertines. Now we think it's just learning by itself. It doesn't know what it's doing, but very soon it's going to be able to create a song that you could not differentiate that was written by the Libertines or by AI. So the moral questions and the ethical questions are coming at us quicker than we think, and they apply just not to the environment. Either we're going to blow ourselves up or something's going to get a little different. But hey, don't trust me, I'm not from Europe. So.
Cindy?
I think I have a positive approach towards KI. I think it's not like artificial intelligence, it's maybe more like enriched natural intelligence or something like that. And I think all the human beings have an interest to keep control over those, so to say, algorithms. And even with deep learning, I think with autonomous driving cars and those things, we still have the interest with neural networks that we, at least in the end, we try to figure out what happened in the black box of a neural network, for example. I think right now we are not that far. I think we are still in this, that for example, algorithms now decide on whether you are, how to say, fitting in kind of criminal stats or something. So if you get checked by the police, or Schufa is also based on algorithm. So that's maybe interesting. And I think we have to to think about this and maybe to make an open and public discourse. I think it's a matter of trust to get the people, to include the people in this kind of process, not to make it behind their backs. And for example, with KI and algorithms, we should decide, I mean, it's already decided by politicians and experts. I think we should decide whether with an algorithm, it's like this, that we put 5 innocent people into prison in order to get maybe one guilty guy, or if we try to get one guilty guy out of the prison, so to keep the 4 innocent also out. So, and those things, they already are happening, they already take place, and I think we are kind of excluded from those decisions. But I wish that we would get more inclusiveness here. Yeah.
Yes. I want to find out, Ralph, do you shop online for clothes after your time at ASOS?
No, I like to feel the flesh. So I like to press the flesh. And then,
an analog shopper.
Yeah, I like to look people in the eye. So no, I don't. So unless it's limited edition sort of sneakers. But,
from abroad. And just because we're running a bit out of time, final question to you: what do you wish for in the future? And do you see are there any positive outcomes? I'm a positive person, and I just want to really see what's there to expect, and data. What can it do to maybe create, inspire us to? What's the potential if we look at a positive thing? I mean, you're quite positive anyway, but
I think there are chances and risks, and I think we should, get the chances and avoid the risks, something like that. And I think there's a lot of potential to optimize, for example, healthcare, or everybody likes to use Google Maps in order to avoid traffic jams. Or I think, so we have already, I think, a lot of improvement in daily life by data, and I think it can go on like this. It's a matter of who is how dealing with data or handling data. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Ralph?
I'd say it's a deeper, almost spiritual and political message, and it goes. You could trace this to pre-Christian text, with the message that you must face what you fear the most, and what we're facing right now is our biggest challenge to humanity, and that answer will only be solved by truth.
Yes.
And the truth is, we have to face things we don't want to have.
Exactly.
Blockchain and the data will allow us to face truth like we've never had to before.
Yes.
So
Thank
my
you.
optimism.
Anna?
Well, I'm a terrible cynicist, to be perfectly honest, but...
Ask you first.
Well, I think what I hope for is that mankind, humanity, people actually at some point develop a certain sense of maturity in dealing with what we're creating, both from a governmental and ethical perspective and from a technological perspective, I think in the end it boils down to the question whether we as a species are actually able to take responsibility for our own actions. And in order to take responsibility, we have to understand what we're doing first. And that has to do with maturity. So I would very much hope for us as a species that we develop that maturity and we start understanding how we're dealing with our environment, with technology, with political systems. I think we're a terribly, terribly lazy species, and that might actually come back to haunt us, or rather destroy us if we're not terribly careful. So.
It's decision time, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and my last comment would be, the entire birth of technology and computing can be traced to Alan Turing, but it can be traced deeper to the mathematician David Hilbert, who used a German word to pre-set up computing. And that German word was Entscheidungsproblem. And that we are now at a decision problem as a species. And I'm sorry about the butchered pronunciation there, but but that's where we are as humanity. We have a choice in front of us.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Well, are there any questions from you guys to our lovely panel?